I poisoned an entire village's milk supply when I discovered I was adopted. But when I learned the truth at that same hospital where I was abandoned, I realized who was the real villain in this story. My name is Cornelius Fernsby, and for 32 years I believed I knew exactly who I was. I worked alongside my father Thomas every single morning at our dairy farm in Lower Thornfield, milking our Jersey cows, loading bottles into our delivery van, driving through the Gloucestershire countryside to serve families who trusted the Fernsby name for 3 generations. The work was honest, backbreaking, and profitable enough to keep us comfortable. My mother Beth would pack sandwiches for our routes, always asking about customers, remembering birthdays, treating every delivery like we were feeding an entire regiment. I genuinely believed this was my blood, my legacy, my birthright. We'd wake up at 5 every morning without exception. Dad taught me from childhood that milk waits for no one, and our reputation depended on consistency. By 6, we were in the milking parlour, and by 7:30, the van was loaded with 50 bottles of fresh milk for our village route. I knew every customer by name, knew who liked to chat, who was always in a hurry, who paid in advance at the start of each month. Mrs. Henderson always offered me tea when I delivered to her cottage at 8 sharp. Mr. Davies from the Crown Pub bought 10 bottles weekly and always commented on how our milk made the best foam for coffees. The Whitmore family had 3 small children and bought 15 bottles. And I watched those kids grow year after year, always running to the door when they heard our van approaching. It was the joy of their mornings, like we were some kind of ice cream truck bringing magic to their day. For 32 years, I built relationships, learned the business, took on increasing responsibilities. Dad let me handle the difficult collections, negotiate contracts with new customers, even decide on farm investments. I was proud of this. Thought I was being groomed to inherit everything someday. Then I found those adoption papers hidden at the bottom of an old trunk in the office. 32 years of lies. Every story about when you were born, every mention of you have your grandfather's hands, my entire existence built on deception. The betrayal cut deeper than I thought possible, because it wasn't just about being adopted. It was about being deceived every single day for over 3 decades. The papers were dated from St. Mary's Hospital, the same place where my parents had been going for fertility treatments for years before I arrived. They'd been trying desperately to have children, spending money we didn't have, and somehow I just appeared. But here's what really pushed me over the edge, what made me cross a line I never thought I'd cross. I started questioning everything. If they could be so cynical as to lie to me for 32 years, I could lie to our customers for 32 days. Look, I need your honest opinion here. Would anyone really blame me for wanting answers? For wanting some kind of justice after discovering my entire life was built on lies? Comment below and let me know, because what happened next changed everything. And if you think this confession is intense, subscribe now so you don't miss anything, because you haven't heard the worst part yet. The first morning I added water to the milk bottles, my hands were completely steady. I started slowly, just a few drops in each bottle of the morning route. Mrs. Henderson didn't notice anything in her tea. Mr. Davies didn't complain about the coffee foam. The Whitmore children drank everything normally at dinner. It was as if the universe was on my side, validating my strategy. But what I didn't know, what none of us knew at that moment, was that I was about to discover a truth that would make my small revenge seem insignificant in comparison. By the second week, I'd calculated that adding 30% water to our milk still maintained enough richness that casual customers wouldn't notice immediately. Mrs. Henderson mentioned once that her morning tea tasted slightly different, but I smiled warmly and suggested maybe she'd changed her tea leaves recently. She nodded, completely satisfied with my explanation. The methodical approach felt almost liberating. Every morning I'd wake up with this sense of purpose, like I was finally taking control of something in my life after 32 years of being controlled by other people's lies. I'd fill our metal watering can from the well behind our cottage, then systematically add measured amounts to each glass bottle before sealing them with our traditional Fernsby dairy caps. Dad never suspected anything. He'd load the van while humming old Welsh mining songs, completely trusting that I was handling the quality control exactly as he'd taught me. The irony wasn't lost on me, that the man who taught me everything about honesty and Integrity was now unknowingly distributing watered-down milk throughout Lower Thornfield. But I wasn't just randomly sabotaging our product out of anger. I had a specific plan, a calculated timeline that would maximize the impact when the truth eventually came out. I documented everything in a small notebook I kept hidden under my mattress, recording exactly which customers received which dilution levels, tracking their reactions, their complaints, their continued loyalty despite the declining quality. The Whitmore children never seemed to notice the difference. They'd still come running to the door each morning when they heard our van, still drank their breakfast milk with the same enthusiasm. Mr. Davies at the Crown still served coffee to his customers, though I noticed he'd started using slightly more milk per cup to achieve the same foam quality. What fascinated me most during those early weeks was how easily people accepted degraded quality when it came with familiar, packaging and trusted relationships. Our customers had relied on the Fernsby name for generations, so they simply adjusted their expectations rather than questioning whether we'd changed our standards. By the third week, I was adding 50% water to half our bottles and 40% to the others. The more watered-down milk went to customers I felt had been most complicit in hiding my adoption from me over the years. Mrs. Henderson, who'd known my parents since before I arrived, got the most diluted bottles. The Davies family, who'd attended every village event where my birth story was told, received similarly compromised milk. My strategy was working perfectly. Trust was eroding gradually, complaints were increasing incrementally, but no one suspected deliberate sabotage yet. They blamed supplier issues, seasonal changes in cow diet, anything except the possibility that Thomas Fernsby's beloved son might be systematically destroying 3 generations of family reputation. You will see how calculated revenge can get, because what I did in week 4 changed the entire game. The morning I decided to add pond water from our livestock drinking trough instead of well water, my hands were still completely steady. Adding pond water changed everything about my strategy, because suddenly the consequences became immediate and undeniable. Within 3 days of using livestock drinking water instead of well water, Mrs. Henderson called to complain that her milk had developed a strange yellowish tint and smelled off. The Whitmore children refused to drink their breakfast milk 2 mornings in a row, claiming it tasted muddy. But instead of feeling concerned, I felt validated. Finally, someone was noticing the degradation, finally questioning something they'd taken for granted. For 32 years, these families had accepted the Fernsby name as synonymous with quality, never bothering to verify, never bothering to investigate. Now they were getting exactly what blind trust deserved. Mr. Davies at the Crown stopped serving coffee that required milk foam, switching to black coffee specials instead. When Dad asked him directly about the change, Davies mentioned casually that milk quality seemed inconsistent lately, but didn't want to make accusations without proof. The diplomatic approach, typical of village politeness, protecting relationships over confronting problems. I documented every complaint, every substitution, every moment of doubt in my hidden notebook. The pattern was fascinating from a psychological perspective. How people adjusted their behaviors to accommodate declining standards, rather than challenging trusted suppliers. They were enabling their own exploitation through misplaced loyalty. By the 4th week, I'd moved beyond water dilution entirely. I started adding small amounts of chalk dust to simulate thickness, salt to mask the watery taste, and drops of food coloring to maintain the rich cream appearance our customers expected. The scientific approach felt almost artistic, like creating a perfect counterfeit of something genuine. Dad noticed the increased complaints but blamed seasonal factors, cow diet changes, equipment aging. He spent hours inspecting our milking machinery, testing our pasteurization process, examining our storage tanks. The man who'd taught me everything about integrity was desperately trying to solve a problem I was creating right under his nose. The irony consumed me with satisfaction. Here was Thomas Fernsby, respected businessman, pillar of the community, frantically troubleshooting quality issues, while his beloved son systematically destroyed everything he'd built, the same way he'd systematically built my entire identity on deception. Beth suggested consulting with dairy experts from Gloucester, investing in new equipment, maybe switching feed suppliers. She worried that our reputation was suffering, that 3 generations of family legacy might be damaged permanently. Her genuine concern for our business almost broke my resolve, until I remembered that her love for me was also built on lies. The morning I decided to see how far I could push before anyone actually confronted us directly, my hands were no longer steady. They were excited. 6 weeks into my calculated destruction, something unexpected happened that nearly derailed my entire plan. A letter arrived from the Gloucestershire Dairy Cooperative announcing the annual Harvest Festival competition, with this year's theme being traditional family dairy excellence. The winner would receive the Golden Churn Award and a 3-year contract to supply milk to surrounding villages. Dad's face lit up when he read the announcement. This was exactly the kind of recognition he'd dreamed of for decades. Proof that Fernsby Dairy stood among the best family operations in the county. He started planning immediately, discussing which of our Jersey cows would produce the richest samples, which aging techniques would showcase our traditional methods. For the first time since finding those adoption papers, I felt something resembling panic. My contamination strategy had been designed for gradual erosion, not public scrutiny. A dairy competition would mean expert judges, chemical analysis, direct comparison with legitimate producers. My adulterated milk wouldn't just fail, it would expose deliberate sabotage. But then I realized this was actually perfect. Instead of slowly poisoning individual customers, I could destroy the Fernsby reputation completely in one devastating public moment. The humiliation would be absolute, witnessed by every dairy farmer in Gloucestershire, recorded in regional newspapers, remembered for generations. I encouraged Dad's enthusiasm, helped him select our best cows, assisted with preparation strategies. Every suggestion I made was designed to maximize the contrast between expectation and reality. I recommended our most contaminated batch as our competition entry, claiming the unusual color came from premium grass feeding. The festival was scheduled for the second Saturday of October, giving me 3 more weeks to perfect my sabotage formula. I increased chalk dust concentrations, added more salt for complexity, experimented with different food colorings to achieve what looked like exceptional richness. By competition day, our entry would be a masterpiece of deception. Beth worried that we seemed overconfident compared to previous years. She'd attended every harvest festival since marrying Dad, watched him compete respectfully, but never with this level of certainty. I assured her our preparation was just more thorough this time, that finally we'd received the recognition the Fernsby name deserved. What I didn't tell her, what I couldn't tell anyone, was that I planned to destroy that name completely, in front of everyone who'd participated in lying to me for 32 years. The morning I finalized our competition entry formula, my hands were completely calm, but my heart was racing with anticipation. Competition day arrived with perfect autumn weather, crisp air carrying the scent of fallen leaves across St. Mary's churchyard, where dairy farmers from 6 counties had gathered. Wooden tables displayed glass bottles representing 3 generations of family traditions, each producer hoping to prove their legacy worthy of recognition. I watched Dad polish our entry bottles with unprecedented care, arranging them precisely on our designated table space. His pride radiated genuine joy, the satisfaction of a craftsman presenting his life's work for peer evaluation. Beth took photographs, documenting what she believed would be our family's greatest triumph. The judging panel consisted of 5 dairy experts from Oxford Agricultural College, regional cooperative representatives, and the previous year's Golden Churn winner. They moved methodically from table to table, examining color, testing consistency, evaluating aroma. Professional, thorough, impossible to fool with my amateur chemistry experiments. When they reached our display, I felt my chest tighten with nervous excitement. Dad smiled warmly, explaining our traditional grass-fed methods and time-honored family techniques. The head judge poured our milk into a clear testing glass, held it up to examine the color, then brought it to his nose for evaluation. His expression changed immediately. Not the gradual concern I'd anticipated, but instant, unmistakable alarm. He whispered something to his colleagues, who gathered around our samples with increasingly serious faces. Within moments, all 5 judges were examining our bottles, discussing in low voices, occasionally glancing toward Dad with expressions that mixed confusion with professional dismay. "I'm sorry. Mr. Fernsby," the head judge announced loudly enough for surrounding tables to hear, "but this product appears to be severely contaminated and completely unsuitable for consumption." He set down the testing glass with visible disgust, the sound echoing across suddenly silent churchyard. The humiliation was perfect, absolute, witnessed by everyone who mattered. Farmers stopped their conversations to stare. Families whispered behind their hands. Local newspaper photographers captured Dad's shocked expression. 32 years of reputation destroyed in 30 seconds of public judgment. But something was wrong. Dad wasn't just embarrassed. He was genuinely confused, desperately trying to understand how this could have happened. Beth looked devastated, not just disappointed but truly heartbroken. These weren't the faces of people who'd been caught in deception. These were the faces of people who'd been betrayed. Stay with me. If you want to see what happened when I realized I might have made the biggest mistake of my life, because what I discovered next made me question everything I thought I knew about my family. That evening, driving home in complete silence, I started wondering if perhaps I was the one who'd been wrong all along. The 3 days following the festival humiliation were the longest of my life. Word had spread through Lower Thornfield faster than wildfire, and suddenly neighbours who'd known me since childhood were crossing the street to avoid conversation. Mrs. Henderson stopped answering her door when our van approached. The Whitmore children no longer ran outside with excitement when they heard our engine. But something was bothering me beyond the public shame, something I couldn't quite articulate until I started questioning whether my revenge had been justified in the first place. If Dad and Beth had been lying about my adoption for 32 years, why did they look genuinely devastated by our public humiliation? Why didn't they seem guilty or caught in deception, but rather confused and heartbroken? I started second-guessing my entire strategy. Was it possible that keeping my adoption secret hadn't been malicious deception, but rather protective love? Maybe they'd been waiting for the right time to tell me, or maybe they genuinely believed it would never matter, because I was their son in every way that counted. The doubt was eating me alive. But I couldn't show weakness now. I'd committed to this path of calculated revenge, and backing down would mean admitting I'd destroyed 3 generations of family reputation based on a misunderstanding. So I doubled down on my anger instead, convincing myself that they deserved everything that was happening. But late at night, when I couldn't sleep, I'd think about Dad teaching me to milk our first Jersey cow when I was 8 years old. I'd remember Beth staying up all night when I had pneumonia at 12, refusing to leave my bedside until my fever broke. These weren't the behaviours of people who saw me as some kind of unwanted burden they'd been saddled with. The investigation notice arrived from the Gloucestershire Health Department on Tuesday morning. They'd received multiple complaints about contaminated dairy products and were conducting a full inspection of our facilities, our processes, and our recent product samples. Dad opened the letter with shaking hands, reading it 3 times before setting it down on our kitchen table. "Cornelius," he said quietly, using the formal tone he reserved for serious conversations, "I need you to help me understand what's been happening with our milk quality. The inspector will be here Friday, and I need to know if there's something we've missed in our procedures." This was my opportunity to confess, to explain everything and ask for forgiveness. But instead, I looked him directly in the eyes and said, "I honestly don't know, Dad. Maybe it's time to consider that our equipment is just too old to maintain the standards people expect now." The lie came so easily, felt so natural that I realized I'd become exactly the kind of person I'd accused him of being. The only difference was that his deception had been motivated by love, while mine was motivated by pure spite. That night, I decided I needed to know the complete truth about my adoption before the health department destroyed everything we'd built. I was going to St. Mary's Hospital to find my original birth records, no matter what it cost me. St. Mary's Hospital kept their adoption records in a basement archive that smelled like old paper and disinfectant. The records clerk, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, initially refused my request until I explained that I needed my medical history for the health department investigation. Sometimes the truth selectively presented opens doors more effectively than any lie. "The records from 1991 are complete," she said, pulling a thick manila folder from a metal filing cabinet. "But I should warn you, some of these older files contain details that can be quite upsetting for adopted children to read." I assured her I was prepared for anything, but nothing could have prepared me for what I found in that folder. The first document was my original birth certificate, listing my birth mother as Sarah Jane Morrison, age 19, unmarried. But it was the social worker's report that changed everything I thought I knew about my story. According to the detailed case notes, My birth mother had been involved with a married man who refused to leave his wife when she became pregnant. She'd hidden the pregnancy from her family, worked as a waitress until she couldn't anymore, and lived in a women's shelter for the final 3 months. The social worker described her as intelligent but desperate, with no family support system and no financial resources. But here's the part that made my chest tighten with unexpected emotion. The report noted that she'd spent hours choosing my adoptive family from dozens of applications, specifically selecting Thomas and Beth Fernsby because they demonstrated genuine love, financial stability, and a rural environment where the child would have space to grow. She'd even written a letter to be given to me when I turned 18. I'd never received that letter. My parents had never told me it existed. The social worker's notes continued. Birth mother requests that adoptive family not be informed of her identity to protect their privacy and avoid future complications. She specifically requested that the child be told he was chosen with love and that his birth mother's decision came from wanting the best possible life for him, not from rejection. I sat in that basement archive for 2 hours, reading and rereading every document, trying to reconcile this version of my adoption with the betrayal narrative I'd constructed. My birth mother hadn't abandoned me carelessly. She'd sacrificed everything to give me the best possible life. And my adoptive parents hadn't stolen me or deceived me maliciously. They'd simply honored her request for privacy. But there was still that missing letter, the one that should have been given to me at 18. Why had they kept that from me? Why had they never mentioned that my birth mother had left me a personal message? When I walked out of St. Mary's Hospital that evening, I wasn't sure who I was angry with anymore. But I knew I needed to confront my parents about that letter before the health department inspection destroyed everything we had left. Leave a comment if you think you know where this is going, because what happened when I demanded to see that letter made me realize I'd been wrong about everything from the very beginning. The letter was in Dad's desk drawer, right where I'd found the adoption papers 6 weeks earlier. But this time, when I confronted him about it, he didn't try to hide anything. He pulled out a sealed envelope, yellowed with age, with "For Cornelius" on his 18th birthday written in careful handwriting across the front. "We should have given this to you years ago," Dad said, his voice heavy with regret. "But every time we planned to tell you about the adoption, you seemed so happy, so settled. We kept thinking there would be a better time. And then years passed, and it became harder to explain why we'd waited so long." Beth sat beside him at our kitchen table, tears streaming down her face. "We were cowards, Cornelius, not because we were ashamed of your adoption, but because we were terrified of losing you. We thought if you knew the truth, you might want to find your birth mother, and we couldn't bear the thought of you discovering that your real family wasn't us." I opened the letter with shaking hands, and what I read inside changed everything I thought I understood about love, sacrifice, and family. "My dearest son," it began, "by the time you read this, you'll be 18 years old. And I hope you'll be surrounded by people who love you as much as I do. I want you to know that giving you to Thomas and Beth Fernsby was the hardest and most loving thing I've ever done in my life." She explained everything the social worker's report had mentioned, but in her own words, with details that made my chest ache with unexpected grief. She'd been working double shifts at a diner, saving every penny for baby supplies, sleeping in her car some nights because she couldn't afford both rent and proper nutrition. When she realized she couldn't give me the life I deserved, she'd spent weeks researching adoptive families, looking for people who would love me unconditionally. But here's what destroyed me completely. The letter's final paragraph read, "I chose the Fernsbys because when I met them, I could see how desperately they wanted a child to love. I could see that they would never let you doubt, even for a single day, how wanted and cherished you are. If you're reading this, it means they succeeded in giving you the life I dreamed of for you. Please don't be angry with them for keeping this letter, because I asked them to use their judgment about when you were ready to hear my story." She'd given my parents permission to withhold the letter until they felt I was emotionally prepared. She'd trusted them completely with the most important decision of her life, and they'd spent 18 years terrified of betraying that trust by telling me at the wrong moment. I looked up at my parents, these people who'd loved me unconditionally for 32 years, who'd built their entire lives around giving me everything I needed, and realized I'd spent 6 weeks systematically destroying them, because I'd felt betrayed by love instead of recognizing it. The health department inspection, I said quietly. I need to tell you something about why our milk has been failing quality tests. That's when I confessed everything and learned who the real villain in this story had always been. My parents listened to my entire confession in silence, absorbing the details of how I'd systematically contaminated our milk supply for 6 weeks, destroyed our reputation at the Harvest Festival, and endangered the health of every family who'd trusted our product. When I finished, Dad leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes for a long moment. The chalk dust could have seriously hurt someone, Beth said softly. Mrs. Henderson has stomach problems, and the Whitmore children could have gotten sick from the pond water contamination. I knew she was right, and the guilt was crushing me. What had started as calculated revenge against people I thought had deceived me had become genuine endangerment of innocent neighbours who'd never done anything except trust our family name. I'd been so focused on my own hurt feelings that I'd lost sight of how my actions affected real people with real lives. But Dad surprised me with his response. Instead of anger or disappointment, he just looked tired and sad. Son, I understand why you felt betrayed when you found those papers. If I'd found out at 32 that my parents had kept such a fundamental secret, I might have reacted badly too. But the difference is, you had the intelligence and creativity to plan something this elaborate, and you used those gifts to hurt people instead of helping them. The health department inspection was scheduled for the next morning, which gave us less than 12 hours to figure out how to handle the situation. We couldn't hide what I'd done because they were going to test everything, and the contamination evidence would be obvious. But confessing to deliberate sabotage would result in criminal charges, business closure, and potentially lawsuits from every customer who'd consumed our adulterated products. We spent the night cleaning every piece of equipment, disposing of all contaminated inventory, and preparing fresh samples from our purest milk sources. But more importantly, we spent those hours talking through 32 years of family history, sharing stories and memories that helped me understand how much love had shaped every decision they'd made. Beth told me about the years of fertility treatments, the devastating miscarriages, the depression that nearly destroyed their marriage before I arrived. Dad explained how holding me for the first time had felt like a miracle they'd never expected to receive. They'd been so grateful for the opportunity to be parents that they'd convinced themselves protecting me from the complexity of my origin story was the same as protecting me from pain. We made mistakes, Beth admitted, but they were mistakes born from loving you too much, not too little. When the health inspector arrived Friday morning, we were ready with our story. We admitted to quality control failures during a difficult family period and accepted full responsibility for the contaminated products. We agreed to voluntary suspension of our dairy license, comprehensive retraining, and quarterly inspections for the following year. The inspector was professional but sympathetic. Rural family dairies face enormous pressures, and our willingness to accept responsibility instead of making excuses worked in our favor. We avoided criminal charges, but we lost 6 months of income and most of our customer base. The real consequence wasn't financial, though. It was learning to live with the knowledge that I'd nearly destroyed the people who'd loved me most, and that I'd have to spend years proving I deserved the forgiveness they'd already given me. Rebuilding took 3 years, but not just rebuilding our business, rebuilding who I was as a person. We started small, with just a few customers who were willing to give us a second chance, delivering milk for free for the first 6 months to prove our commitment to quality. Mrs. Henderson was actually the first person to place a new order, which nearly brought me to tears when she called. The Whitmore children were older by then, but they still came to the door when they heard our van, though with less enthusiasm than before. Mr. Davies at the Crown started serving coffee with milk foam again, but he never quite looked at me the same way. Trust, once broken by deliberate betrayal, heals differently than trust broken by accident. I spent those 3 years learning everything I could about dairy science, quality control, and business ethics. I got certified in food safety management, took courses in customer service, and worked with a counselor to understand why I'd reacted to hurt feelings with such calculated cruelty. The answer was complicated, but it boiled down to pride and entitlement, 2 characteristics that had nearly destroyed everyone I cared about. But the hardest part was forgiving myself for wasting so much time hating people who'd never stopped loving me. My parents aged visibly during those difficult years, not from the business stress, but from watching their son struggle with the consequences of his own choices. They never once said, "I told you so," or reminded me that my suffering was self-inflicted. Today, Fernsby Dairy supplies milk to 4 villages and employs 3 full-time workers besides our family. We're not just profitable, we're trusted again, though that trust had to be earned one honest delivery at a time. I married a woman who knew my entire story before our first date, and we're raising 2 daughters who will always know the truth about where they came from and how much they're wanted. The letter from my birth mother sits framed in our kitchen now, a reminder that love sometimes means making decisions that others might not understand until much later. I've never tried to contact her, because her letter made it clear that her gift to me was the family she chose, not ongoing involvement in my life. But I think about her often, and I'm grateful she trusted Thomas and Beth Fernsby to love me the way she knew I deserved. Still wake up some mornings thinking about those 6 weeks when I convinced myself that calculated cruelty was justified by hurt feelings. It's a dangerous mindset, that belief that being wronged gives you permission to wrong others in return. The truth is, I wasn't wronged at all. I was loved by multiple people in the best ways they knew how, and I nearly destroyed that love because I couldn't see past my own wounded pride. Subscribe if this story resonates with you, and hit that notification bell because I share more confessions like this one. Honestly, I need to know your opinion on something. When someone hurts you with love instead of malice, do you owe them forgiveness, or do you owe it to yourself to protect your feelings first? Leave your thoughts below, because this question still keeps me up at night sometimes. Maybe the real villain in every story is the part of ourselves that chooses revenge over understanding, that prioritizes being right over being kind. And maybe learning to recognize that villain early enough to choose differently is what growing up actually means.